I know your time is short. Let me start out with a question. You mentioned at the start of your remarks that the emerging markets now accounted for about 1/2 the world economy. You could have added that they are growing 3 times as fast as the so-called advanced countries, and so their global share will be rising by about 2% a year. And if we're here talking about this 10 years from now, the emerging markets will be about 2/3 of the world economy. So my question is the following. Are you satisfied that the international institutions that you mentioned, the G20, the IMF, the others, have moved quickly enough to reflect those changes in economic power that you referred to? Is there enough evolution in global governance to accurately reflect the actual state of today's world economy?
It is moving, but not with the speed we expected and many of others are expecting. But surely it is moving in the right direction. I'll just give you one example because I was involved in a small way in the evolution of how G20 came after the Washington summit, followed quickly by the London summit and then by Pittsburgh summit. When a small event, if I be permitted to say so, rather in discussion of subprime lending in the housing mortgage, in one institution in USA, could engulf the whole world into a major international financial crisis, the world leaders at that point of time did not fail to recognize the depth and intensity of the crisis and the quick response which came. Initiative was taken by the then US President Bruce, and quickly organized the world leaders, including the emerging economies. It was not a conference of the G8 or G10. Immediately recognizing the importance of the emerging markets itself is an evidence that world leadership can respond. But at the same time, I would like to say particularly the established institutions which are 60 years old or more than 60 years old, the Bretton Woods institutions, they should move little faster. Thank you.
Let me ask a follow-up question. There was very recently a meeting in Delhi of the heads of government of the BRIC countries. And I think you and your colleagues from the finance ministries participated in that as well. Do you see the BRICS as an important grouping of countries that will have significant impact on governance of the global economy and become a force for speeding up that evolution that you would like to see?
You know, if you look at the characters of BRICS, it represents Asia, it represents Europe, it represents Africa, it represents Latin America, in all 5 countries. Its total contribution in the world output today is substantial. And even as per the latest World Outlook by IMF and the forecast, 2 countries which are being mentioned having the first and second, of course there is a big gap, they also belong to the BRICS. I would not say that they are having a big impact in the decision-making process of the world today, but surely they have a place and they cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Arvind, would you like to pose a question to the minister?
Very briefly, thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for that excellent speech. The question, I guess, that many of us are wondering is that, if you were to choose, one or two key areas of reform domestically that had some political hope of getting passed in the next 1 year or so, what would your one or two key reforms be in India?
In fact, we are already at the legislative fronts. We have already completed the preliminary legislative process. Pension Fund Regulation Act, Insurance Amendment Act, and Banking Amendment Act. These three acts, I do hope, will get legislated in this calendar year. If not in this session, but next session. Administratively, we can take certain measures through, of course, we shall have to persuade various stakeholders, including the state governments. If we could do so, perhaps GST and the constitutional amendment necessary to implement GST would be possible to get it passed through this or next session of Parliament, and thereafter to be ratified by minimum 15 provincial assemblies before the end of the year. So far the direct taxes are concerned, I am quite confident that it will be implemented after the laws being passed in the next session of Parliament from the next financial year. Therefore, on the tax reforms, direct tax code would be operationalized from the next financial year. In respect of indirect taxes, the most important decision to be taken to implement the GST constitutional amendment that may be possible, likely to be possible within this calendar year, and of course for after ratification and doing certain other works, operationalize it may be little less because 28 states are involved, and three important legislations in the fiscal side, pension fund, insurance and banking, would be possible to implement it.
Madam Ambassador or Mr. Banerjee, would you like to pose a question to the Minister?
Well, Mr. Minister, from the point of view of being the Indian ambassador here, I'd like to ask you about what your outlook would be for India-US strategic partnership, especially from the trade and business point of view.
In fact, that is the question which you are putting right now. There is some sense of despondency amongst a section of USA businessmen, and particularly because of their apprehension, and I would say misapprehension, about certain legislative amendments which we have proposed in my fiscal proposals in the budget. And they have some doubts about, I am talking of the US businessmen, whether the tax regime in India is stable or not. My answer is, it is stable. It is clear, it is stable. Even the current amendments which is being debated, I have explained it, that the nature of the amendment which I have introduced through the finance bill is of clarificatory nature, not substantive amendments in the law, in the contents of the law. One question comes to the mind that when you are giving retrospective effect of the law from the date of enactment, that is 1962 Income Tax Act, would the income tax cases be opened from 1962? Answer is no, because there are other provisions in the Income Tax Act itself that no case can be reopened which is more than 6 years old. Therefore, there is no uncertainty, and the attempt is being made to give certainty to the tax laws, that this is the intention from the beginning of the enactment. Intention of the legislature is quite clear from the beginning of the enactment. Secondly, the investment decision is not taken merely to have the tax concessions or not. What is the size of the market of the country? Whether there are systems for the which are transparent and which are testable. Thirdly, what are the purchasing power of the people there? From all these standpoints, India appears to be a good investment destination, so therefore there should not be any apprehension. So far our relationship between our two countries are concerned, it is expanding, it is very much expanding and almost all comprehensive. Hardly there is any area where we are not having interaction with USA. Defense, external relations, security, collective efforts to confront terrorism, to fight against drug, narcotics. In all areas, our strategic partnership is becoming comprehensive. Therefore, I do feel from in the coming years, our relationship will move from strength to strength. Thank you.
Mr. Minister and Madam Ambassador, let me try to cheer you up a bit on that front. Here at the Peterson Institute, we have just launched a very major study of a possible economic partnership agreement between the United States and India. We try to build on the strengths that you mentioned and try to lay out a series of steps that could be taken over time to overcome some of the problems that are perceived and mentioned, and would try to place our whole relationship on a much more comprehensive basis. The U.S.-India Business Council is working closely with us, supporting our effort. We bring that into the private sector advisory group to the trade ministers that I chair for the U.S. side, that our friends from CII work on from the Indian side. So we are hoping to pave the way for the two governments, perhaps next year, after our own elections, to take some pragmatic further steps in the direction of strengthening those economic ties.
And I would like to add one more institution, that is the strategic dialogue, financial and economic talk between finance ministers and treasury secretary, which has been institutionalized annually. And in fact, yesterday when I had interaction with Secretary Gaidner, I have invited him and tried to find out the convenient date. We are going to meet in the month of June, and that is very important.
It is indeed, and at some point we would be happy to present our proposals to you for your consideration.
Most welcome.
Mr. Banerjee.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, sir, two quick questions. One is, post the financial crisis, we have seen protectionism on the rise across the world, particularly in the West. Are you concerned about this, sir? Does this threaten the multilateral trading order? It appears that the proponents of globalization are more protectionist than probably the others. That's one. And second, I just wanted to talk a bit about our internal front. And in the union budget, which you just presented a few weeks back, you have made comments on some of the most interesting reforms. And one of the things that you have really included is on capping of subsidies with 2% of GDP this year. Would the minister like to elaborate on what kind of measures he is really looking to achieve this very aggressive cut in subsidies?
In fact, in my budget speech also I have broadly given hint that which are the areas I would like to peg the subsidies. Except on food, in all other areas, I would like to reduce the subsidies. And my strategy would be two-pronged. First, to prevent the leakage of subsidy by ensuring and taking technological advantage, by ensuring that the subsidies reach the targeted beneficiaries. And already I have started some measures in that direction. For instance, LPG. All subscribers of LPG are buying LPGs at the market rate, but the targeted beneficiaries are receiving the subsidies at their bank accounts. Currently it is operationalized in pilot project, and after some time when it will be applied universally, substantially the quantum of subsidies on this account will be reduced. Similarly, we are trying to address another area, two other areas, fertilizer and kerosene, where the subsidies are being misused. Once we take the advantage of technology and ensure availability of subsidy to the targeted beneficiaries through banks, then the leakage would be prevented and there will be a lot of savings. Third area is, of course, that quantum ceiling. For that I said that my target is, currently I am saying it is 2% of GDP, but my target is to reach 1.75 in the next 3 years. And if I am quite confident that it will be possible to do so, because I have seen how the policy response can rise to the occasion at the time of crisis. In early 90s, we had to face a very serious crisis. The ruling party did not have the necessary majority in legislature, but all major decisions, radical reforms, industrial policy, investment policy, trade policy, received universal support from various political parties, as everybody recognized at the same time this is essential and these are to be done. Therefore, the country has the resilience and capacity to respond to the occasion when situation so demands. And I think that this is a time where we expect to have the support from almost all stakeholders. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, thank you. If you have a few more minutes, I'd like to turn to the audience and see if we would have a couple of questions from them for you. So the floor is open. Please go to the standing mic in the back or speak to the traveling mic right here. Yes, ma'am. Please identify yourself and then ask your questions.
Good evening, Mr. Minister. It is wonderful to see you again, and we're so pleased that you are here in the United States participating in these very important meetings. My name is Diane Farrell. I'm the Executive Vice President at the U.S.-India Business Council, and I'm probably one of those despondent members of the business community that you were just describing a few moments ago. We very much appreciate your comment in response to the question that was posed by Ambassador Rao, and I don't want to belabor the point other than to say that we appreciate the conversation that you had with Secretary Geithner yesterday regarding the concerns that have been conveyed to both the Secretary as well as to your offices. It goes without saying that the members of the business community who have invested in India are passionately committed to all of the objectives that you've outlined when you talk about the opportunities there. The concern that we have is, of course, that we want to make sure it is a welcoming environment to investment, since, as you point out, with the commitment that's been made in the most recent 5-year plan, $1 trillion in infrastructure investment, where you're looking for 50% public-private participation, where our companies are wanting to bring the kinds of technologies where they want to see markets open so that they can be both competitive and cooperative, as I think you wisely point out when you quote President Roosevelt. So that is our perspective. That is the position that we come from. The concern, particularly about retrospectivity, has to do with the amount of work required that companies now feel they have in order to justify what taxes have been paid in the past, and also a concern that agreements that have been understood, whether it's our tax treaty with Mauritius, for example, is now subject to perhaps change without negotiation and participation in negotiation. These are uncertainties that have an impact on the investment community. And it isn't just in the United States. As you certainly know, the British have expressed their concerns when their finance minister was visiting India recently. So it's within that context that we're interested in your perspective and your insights and any assuring statements that you would like to make specifically to the business and investment community as it relates to some of these changes that have been most recently proposed, and how there is an assurance that going forward that there's clarity, that there's transparency, that there is an understanding as to where both parties are at the beginning of a transaction, so that there's no concern about pulling back. The other question I have for you does have to do specifically with fuel, and I would be interested to know your thoughts, as that's a global concern right now, and I'm sure it'll be part of the discussions that you'll be having this weekend with your colleagues, as to how India will handle fluctuations in fuel pricing as it relates to the projections that you have for GDP growth in this coming year. Thank you very much, Fred.
In fact, what you have explained, it does not require further elaborations. The only point I would like to submit that our policies are transparent, and always we are subjected to, whenever we had discussions with our partners, and if there be any misapprehension in respect of any policies, we are ready to listen to them and to adjust it as and when it is necessary. Therefore, it is not that we are having any fixed mind in respect of any particular issue, but what is to be done within the legal system and the legal framework which is in operation. But if there be any contradiction or if there be any lacuna therein, we do not hesitate to amend it or to change it. But we must be convinced that it requires to be changed. As I explained in one case particularly which is being debated now, because I do not, when I find that it cannot be retrospective from the date of enactment, our law does not permit it, I do not require to make any change there. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? In the back, John?
John Williamson of the Institute. One fact that you haven't mentioned is the size of the budget deficit. I believe this is about 8 or 9% of GNP, that the overall deficit of the federal and the provincial governments. And I would like to, state governments, I would like to say, I would like to ask whether you think that's consistent with achieving once again the high growth rates that India accomplished in the years when the budget deficit was somewhat smaller, and whether you think in particular allowing the subsidies to continue at still quite a high level is consistent with that.
In fact, you are correct that I shall have to contain the not only budget deficit, fiscal deficit, both states and center taken together. And if we can contain the fiscal deficit and bring back the path of fiscal consolidation, then our growth will be ensured. Keeping that objective in view, I have fixed the target of fiscal deficit for the current year from 5.9% to 5.1% of GDP. States and center taken together, it will have around 7.5 to 8%. And I am advising all the state governments also. Fortunately, some of the states are doing well. As a result, the cumulative impact of all the states collectively, fiscal deficit is varying between 2.5% to 3%. That is being added to 5% of center, and it is becoming 8% plus. But target is to bring it down to 5.1% this year, and subsequently at least 0.6 percentage point less in the next year. Unfortunately, what happened, and we were going in the correct directions. I'll just give you 3 years fiscal deficit position. Before the financial crisis came in 2008-9, our fiscal deficit was less than 3%. In 2007-8, it was less than 3%. Because of the fiscal 2008 crisis, as many other countries injected huge amount of money as stimulus package, we also did so to prevent the further deceleration of growth. Naturally, fiscal deficit increased to 6.6% of GDP. But we brought it down to 4.7% in 2010-11. Because of high oil prices and quantum of subsidies being increased, and because of slow growth, there has been slowdown in the revenue realization. These two factors combined together, the fiscal deficit of the current year has increased. But we cannot maintain this level of fiscal deficit, we must bring it back. That's why we are coming down from 5.9% to 5.1%, and the next year it would be another 0.6 to 7% less. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, so let me go to the gentleman here. The mic is coming. Identify yourself and ask your question.
My name is Sadanand Dhume. I'm with the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your speech and for answering our questions quite candidly. I want to return to the question of retroactive tax, but take a somewhat different angle. You have said that the taxes are not going to be reopened to 1962, and that's a very welcome clarification. But there is another concern which has been expressed, which is that this new law has taken place in the context of a Supreme Court judgment. And the criticism that has occurred, is that what this signals to the investor community is that when the courts go against the government, instead of simply respecting the courts, the government will amend the laws. How would you address this concern?
It's a very intelligent and interesting question, but it is not only in India. In every democracy where the separation of power is there, conflict between legislature and judiciary is almost perennial. As per the scheme of the Constitution, it is the right of the legislature to make laws. It is the right of the court and judiciary to interpret the law. But interpretation of law does not prevent the right of the judiciary to amend the law. You will be surprised to know the first amendment of Indian Constitution was made as a result of a judicial pronouncement. Even then, the entire constitutional body was not constituted, but the first amendment in the Indian Constitution itself was made out of the judicial pronouncement, because the outcome of the judicial pronouncement went against the intention of the legislature. Therefore, the legislature reiterated their intention in a modified form, and that was enacted. Therefore, not only in Indian constitution or Indian system, but many other countries where this system is there, it prevails. Secondly, many a times the judgment of the courts differ. In the current case, the Supreme Court gave a judgment in a tax case recently, for which I had to go to amendment. In an earlier case, which is known as McDowell case, the judgment was completely reversed. Different high courts are giving different judgments. But why the latest judgment is prevailing? Because that is the law. The last judgment will prevail, previous judgment will not prevail. But that does not mean that judgment has no relevance. Secondly, retrospective amendment has been done in the taxation laws not only in India, but even recently in UK. Section 58 of the Finance Act of 2010 was amended, and retrospective effect was given from 1987. And British Court of Appeal upheld that amendment of Section 58 of the Finance Act of 2010 to give effect of retrospective from 1987 is valid, because somebody made his tax planning in such a way to avoid the taxes that is at the cost of the general taxpayers is not acceptable. Thirdly, that number of times, and it is quite obvious in any growing society and system, it is bound to happen, that court will interpret in a way, taking the interpretation of the court into view, the legislature will express their views, adjusting it, either accommodating or rejecting, but if you are adjusting it, and it will get reflected in the legislatures. And if you allow me, I will just expand it little more. From 1950, when Indian Constitution was amended, was introduced, 1950 to 1968, 18 years, Indian judiciary accepted the position that Indian Parliament has all the power to amend any part of the Constitution. 1968, for the first time, Supreme Court said no. Indian Parliament has no power to amend the fundamental right parts of the Indian Constitution. Then series of court cases took place. At that point of time, the then Prime Minister dissolved Parliament, went to the electorate and said that I require special majority to amend the Constitution to vest Indian Parliament with constituent power, so that the judiciary cannot interfere with the laws passed by Parliament in its capacity as constituent power, exercising constituent power. Indian electorate gave that verdict. Constitution was amended, 24th Amendment, 1971. Again, Supreme Court gave verdict in 1975 in another case that, well, you have constituent power, but you cannot change the basic character of the Constitution. And what is basic character? Supreme Court said, I would determine what is basic character. I will not define what is basic character, but I can give illustration. Parliamentary system is basic character. You cannot switch over from parliamentary system to any other. Therefore, the short point which I am trying to drive at, that this is nothing new in any living society, any dynamic society. The differences between interpreter of the law and the lawmakers would continue, and it will have its own way of resolution by both staying side by side, having peaceful coexistence. Therefore, nothing wrong in it. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, we thank you for that formidable analysis of the constitutional system in India, and we thank you for your very precise, very specific, and very thoughtful responses, as well as your candor. I want to thank our colleagues from the Confederation of Indian Industry for co-sponsoring this session. I want to thank all of our audience, and I want to invite all of you to the reception that we are hosting on our patio out back. We have food and drink. We invite you to join us there for further discussion of all this. Mr. Minister, we deeply appreciate your coming. We wish you the best of success with your meetings for the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.